Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh in Panama City, Florida. We're on the Sabbath day, gathered together in the presence of Yahweh and Yahshua to keep His commandment and keep His Sabbath day. The Sabbath day is important to us because it's the identity of Yahweh's people. When we really understand why He gave the Sabbath day, remember that He spoke to Moses and said, "Speak unto the children of Israel and say, I give unto you the Sabbath day as a sign between me and you." And the word that translated sign, Hebrew word, is oath. The word oath in Hebrew means sign. So the importance of the observance of the day is recognition of the sign. That's the sign of Yahweh's people. Names are very important to Yahweh all through the Scripture. Today, I want to speak on a subject of the fulfilled prophecy. Prophecy is history written in advance. And some of the things is yet to be fulfilled. Some has already been fulfilled in type, but as we move along, it ultimately leads us to our Creator, Yahweh. The title will be, "Will I Be Your Elohim?" Question. Think about that. He's asking a question. Will I be your Elohim is what he's saying. In Jeremiah, chapter 31 and verse 1, "At the same time, saith Yahweh, will I be the Elohim of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people." And see, this is a thing that the world needs to get straightened out, and especially the religious world, is what he's talking about here is that he is going to be the leader of the people, the Elohim. He is going to be the sovereign of the people. And he identifies Israel because Israel was considered his people. He chose them for a purpose. And it's not for prejudice, not for above the other nations. He chose him for a purpose, to be a prince. And that's an obligation, that's not a privilege. But many rulers and leaders and even fathers in families thinks it's a privilege to be the head of the house, and they treat their subjects in a manner that is hard on them. But when we understand that the obligation is to take care of the people, and Yahweh is not over us as a privilege. It's His responsibility to be over us because we're His creation. We belong to Him. He calls us His treasure. He calls us His inheritance. Israel, thou art my inheritance. Mankind is the inheritance of Yahweh. And that's important in the understanding the way His Word operates. Verse 2, "Thus saith Yahweh, the people which were left of the sword found grace." Now, there is some grace doctrines that needs to be understood, what he's talking about in grace. See, the world seems to think that grace is the privilege not to have to be obligated to it. We are not under the old law. You've heard that cliche, but we are under grace. But here is what he's saying. Those people who were left of the sword found grace. In other words, we who have been in war constantly as a nation throughout the generations, we have found grace because Yahweh has accepted us back as His treasure. Yahweh has not only accepted us back, He has bought us back. And what we are attempting to recognize this coming up a couple of weeks in this feast day. Some people is trying to put a pagan holiday in the place of it, and it's blinding a lot of people. But when we really understand that during this time that the Passover is the key to Yahweh's payment for his treasure, that he bought his inheritance back, and we who have been under the sword as a generation of people from generation to generation have found grace. Unmerited pardon from sin. Something we didn't deserve, but he gave it to us because we're his. He has an affinity for his people. He loves them. In the wilderness, even Israel, when I went to cause him to rest. See, Yahshua came down here to cause us to rest. We rest in his word. We rest on his special day. We're resting today in the worship of Yahweh. And there's going to be a time when we're going to really rest some. Verse 3, Yahweh hath appeared unto me, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love, therefore with loving kindness have I drawn thee. Now this is Yahweh speaking to the population of this earth, and he's calling Israel first because Israel is supposed to take responsibility of the rest of the world and restore it, not destroy it. You know, kings have a tendency to grab the treasure, grab the land, and then oppress the people. Yahweh does not intend Israel to oppress the rest of the world. Matter of fact, we're supposed to bring them to fruition when the time comes. But that's still prophecy that is history written in advance, and we hadn't quite got there yet. I'm going to read that one more time. Yahweh hath appeared of old unto me, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness have I drawn thee. See, we're to be drawn to Yahweh. Now, feast keeping is just a mechanism and a tool that Yahweh has to draw us to Him. We come together, we have fellowship one with another, we exchange our thoughts, our ideas, we study, we share, and we wash each other in the Word, so to speak. And so we are being drawn. And we are being drawn by His tender love. In verse 1, Jeremiah 31 and 1, I'm going to repeat this just a minute. He says, At that time, says Yahweh, will I be the Elohim of the families of Israel, and they shall be my people. See, he is making that statement to this people. So who are we? I think we're the people of Elohim. We're his people. He says, Thus saith Yahweh, the people who were left of the sword found favor in the wilderness, even Israel, when I went to cause him to rest. Verse 3, Yahweh appeared to me in old time, saying, Yes, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness have I drawn you. Again will I build you. See, we're looking at Israel as an ancient country that was destroyed, and it's just been lost. They even have a cliche, the lost house of Israel. Israel has not been lost. Yahweh's always known where Israel was. We're just lost in our own mind, or as a nation. But Yahweh is going to rebuild us. That's the promise. He wants us to be rebuilt. He said, You shall be built, O Virgin of Israel. Again shall you be adorned with your timbrels, and shall go forth in the dances of those who make merry. Can you imagine a feast where we have a holiday of men and women dancing before Yahweh and the timbrels and the music, and you see some of this stuff on television where they're trying to imitate it, but that's just a sample. One day he's going to let us really do that. He says again, you shall plant vineyards on the mountains of Shemaron. See, Shemaron is got to be restored. He said, the planters shall plant and shall enjoy the fruit of it. We are supposed to enjoy the fruit of our labors. And our labors is supposed to be under the auspices of Yahweh. And we're supposed to utilize the blessings of this earth. When we plant, we're supposed to have a produce. And that's what he's talking about. In verse 6, he says, for there shall be a day that the watchman on the hills of Ephraim shall cry, arise you, and let us all go up to Zion, to Yahweh our Elohim. We're supposed to go up to Zion and present ourselves to Yahweh our Elohim. And remember, notice here he talked about Ephraim. A lot of people says, oh, you're doing, when you talk about keeping feasts and keeping the Old Testament, you're being Jewish. But the Jewish is just a title, and it's mostly on the house called the Yehudim, the house of Yehudah. There's 13 houses of Israel because Yahweh saw fit to split the house of Joseph into two, because Ephraim means prosperity. Joseph means patiently waiting. And Joseph waited patiently in his servitude in Egypt. And he had a son, and he named him Ephraim. And so therefore Yahweh made tribes out of both boys. He says, arise you, and let us go up to Zion, to Yahweh our Elohim. When we worship, we're before Elohim. We're symbolically coming before Zion when we open these words and open these books and read and praise Yahweh. So we get the blessing. Thus saith Yahweh, sing with gladness for Yaakov, and shout for the chief of the nations. Who is the chief of nations? See, one of the children Bible stories that has kind of been lightly esteemed is the story of Abraham. Abraham received a covenant with Yahweh. It's more than a child Bible story. It is the starting of the genealogy of the entire house of Yahweh. And he had a son, and then the son had sons. And those blessings was passed down. And then one became named as Israel. And names mean a lot. Matter of fact, every name has some logic with Yahweh's name, and it means something. Israel means man shall rule as El. His whole title, as his name, he's a ruler. And Abraham is a father. Abraham received the covenant of Yahweh, which means father of nations. Father of nations. His name was Abram before. Abram means high father. But when he got the covenant, Yahweh says, your name shall no longer be Abram, but shall be Abraham. You put the A-M on the end of the word, it means people. father of people. And if he's going to be the father of many nations, he's the responsible party of the nations. He's not the privileged. See, man has this thinking that gets it wrong. If you're on top, you're supposed to be privileged. But if you're at the top, you're supposed to be the authority in charge of and be responsible for the welfare of your heritage. And that's what Abraham was. And he passed it to his son Isaac, and Isaac passed it to Jacob, and Jacob then became Israel. And that started the thing off. And Yahweh is still thinking about this. He recognized that Yaakov was the chief of nations. He says, publish you. See, when we publish, we put it in the papers, put it in some public forum to deliver it. Simply preach, testify, one with another, publish the glory of Yahweh, publish His truth, and what the Scripture says about it, and not try to keep it mixed up with some man-made thinking. You know, the systems that men have divined for themselves confuses knowledge. Academia is in more trouble today than anything else in the world. It's about got the whole world so confused that they don't even know how to turn a light bulb on. He says, praise you and say, Yahweh, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Our prayer should be, Yahweh, save your people. Well, Israel's over there in Palestine. No. That little nation is part of the house of Israel. But specifically, it's one family of a few Yehudim. And there's probably more Yehudim in New York City than there are in Palestine. And they're kinfolks. Miami's got a heavy population of Yehudim. And if you go all over the world, that is a small portion of Yehudim. But the remnant of Israel is the whole 13 houses. See, and people don't really realize that. And Yahweh is going to restore His kingdom, because we're reading it right now. He is going to call it back. See, He carried Israel into captivity for a reason. He let them suffer affliction because He promised Abraham that they would. And He sent them to Egypt, or Mitzrayim, and they suffered for 430 years. They were afflicted 430 years. But He said that they would come out with plenty, and they did. But now, when Israel was carried away into captivity and lost from the academic world, and most of the religious world too, Yahweh has promised to bring Him back. Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 8, He says, behold, I will bring them from the north country. You get you a place map and look straight north all the way into Russia. All to the west, all over Europe. Look further west into the continent to the west of Europe. That's the north country. That's who He's talking about. He says, gather them from the uttermost parts of the earth. Wherever we have migrated as a population of people, Yahweh is gathering us back. He said, and with them the blind and the lame. In other words, those people who have imperfections, bring them back. Bring back the lame. Put them on stretchers. You know, when Israel was coming out of Egypt, they had some old men and old women on stretchers. They had some young children, and they had some lame on. But the soldiers were able-bodied, and they marched. But Yahweh is going to bring us back. He said, the women with child, and her who travails with child together, a great company shall they return here. A great company will return to Yahweh. And we're going to go to Jeremiah 30:1 in just a minute. How are they going to return is the question. Continuing here in verse 16 of Exodus 31. He said, wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. When was it authorized to be turned to Sunday? Where was it authorized to be turned to Sunday? We need to think about that. And here's what he says. It is a sign. That's an oath. Between me and the children of Israel forever. It does not stop. We're not wasting our time in these little congregations, sitting here reading these scriptures and practicing keeping these feasts. All we're doing is rehearsing. We're enjoying the love of Yahweh, and He is pouring His Spirit on us, and we are rehearsing for what's coming in the future. He said, for in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day He rested and was refreshed. Resting on Sabbath day is supposed to be a refreshing, the change of pace. We come out and we raise our hands, we shake hands, we eat food, we read the Word, and that's rest. It's not labor, it's not work. We're doing no servile work. But we're fulfilling the Scripture and enjoying the benefit and blessing. Verse 18, and He gave unto Moshe, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of Elohim. It's all by inspiration.
What chapter?
Exodus 31. Exodus 31. I just had 3 verses there. Now I'm going back to Jeremiah 30. By inspiration of Yahweh. It said, the word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh saying, thus speaks Yahweh Elohim of Israel, saying, write thee all the words that I have spoken unto thee in a book. Now, this is the key to understanding prophecy. Yahweh wrote the book. Jeremiah and Isaiah and all the rest of them were scribes who wrote it for him at dictation. And so when this is speaking, it's Yahweh speaking and not Jeremiah or whichever author it is. He says, for lo, the days come, saith Yahweh, that I will bring again the captivity of my people. Yahweh and Elohim said, I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. See, Yahweh promised it. It's a personal promise to you. Because I believe that if we read these words and we hear these words and we have any understanding of these words, it's speaking to us. We are the recipients of the word that Yahweh has given us. He said, these are the words that Yahweh spoke concerning Israel and concerning Yehudah. See, He split them up. Israel is not Yehudah collectively. Israel is the collection. Yehudah is the one that the king comes through. The return of Israel. Now, it was spoken of in Deuteronomy, some of the things about Israel returning. And I want to read it. We'll go to Deuteronomy 30. And the key verse is going to be 3, but I want to start with 1. Deuteronomy 30 and 1. It shall happen when all these things are come on you, the blessing and curse. Now people wonder why they have trouble. The nation has blessings and curses, and it's because of the sins of the fathers. Our fathers, we are at the extension of our fathers, and everything that's happened to us is the consequence of our fathers. And everything that's going to happen to your children is the consequence of you. We are responsible for who is in front of us. And here's what he said about the blessing and the cursing. He says, which I have set before you, and you shall call them to mind among all the nations where Yahweh your Elohim has driven you. Now this means that Yahweh has driven these 12 tribes, collectively 13 because he mixed Judah in there with them, driven them to every continent of the world. You can go just about anywhere and find Israelites. The most prosperous Israelites has been in the United States. And the reason that was the extension of driving Ephraim and Manasseh to the wilderness. The prosperity tribe of Joseph. And we are the extension of the migration of the people in our history for the last 4,000 years. A lot of people don't understand it that way, but if you'll get in the scripture and read it and understand it, you'll see that there is a blessing coming to us that we can't even retain. And that's the knowledge of our inheritance. Have you ever thought about getting an inheritance that you didn't even know existed? And all of a sudden it was more than you've ever even seen or dreamed of, and you didn't even know how to handle it. Because anytime you get an inheritance, there's responsibilities. Verse 2. And shall return to Yahweh your Elohim, and shall obey his voice according to all I command you this day, you and your children, and with all your heart, and with all your soul. Now, does this sound like he has done away with his Torah, and we are having grace, and we just be religious? It's a definite, permanent promise to us. It's our inheritance. He says, verse 3, this is the key verse, that then Yahweh your Elohim will turn your captivity and have compassion on you, and will return and gather you from all the peoples where Yahweh your Elohim has scattered you. See, Yahweh establishes that he did scatter Israel throughout all of the nations. We're reading here history in advance that we're going to be brought back. It could be in our lifetime. With what's going on in the world right now, it could all happen in just the next few short years. Because when it happens just like that. When it's not happening, it takes a long time. But anyway, it's Yahweh's business. And Yahweh treasures his possession, and we are his business. Verse 4. If any of you, your outcasts, are in the uttermost parts of the heavens, and we have been the nation that fulfilled putting our people in the heavens. We had satellites with manned satellites. Now it seems primitive concerning a long time in the future, but it might not be as primitive as it looks. It might be what Yahweh called. He says, from there will Yahweh your Elohim gather you. He will bring them back. And from there he will bring you back. In verse 5, and Yahweh your Elohim will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed. The land which our fathers possessed. He has not forgotten the land. He gave the land to Abram, and Isaac inherited, and Yaakov inherited, and Yahweh is going to give it to the descendants. and the descendants. And you shall possess it, and he will do good and multiply you above your fathers. He will do us good when we get our mind on what he wants us to know. And he will multiply us above our fathers. The future is still yet good. The future is still to be seen. And the blessings to be reaped. Think about it. Verse 6. Yahweh your Elohim will circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed, to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul, and with that you may live. Now this settles that circumcision question. See, most people who have had problems with that worship the circumcision, not the giver. They violated his rules, but they had to be circumcised. But Yahweh is going to circumcise our hearts. Our minds is going to be open to the truth. And we're going to think clean thoughts, and we're going to think benevolent thoughts, and we're going to take care of our heritage. We're not going to build kingdoms and rule over people and keep them in bondage. We're in the last days of the great bondage, and we're seeing it manifested itself in this nation today. There's things happened in the last 3 years, well, let's say the last 13 years, because it didn't just start with this administration. It's been ongoing. And we are seeing things that can bring this nation to its knees. But the promise and the hope is that Yahweh is going to redeem it. And he can redeem it to the point that he can raise the dead. If we die in the fight, don't worry about it, we'll be raised. Our ancestors that died in the fight, don't worry about them. They're going to be raised. We're going to receive them in that day. He says, to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. He wants us to live, not just breathe air and exist. That's not living. A doctor saves your life in the hospital, and that's all you get. He might call that living. But Yahweh wants you to live. He wants you to think righteous thoughts. He wants you to obey his Torah and live by the Torah and enjoy the blessings that comes in receiving the benefits. We're going to move to Isaiah chapter 11. The key verse is going to be 11:11, but we'll start with Isaiah 11:1. And this is what he is talking about in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but he prophesied it a long time before, and that was fulfilled. And here's what he says. Verse 1, a shoot will come out of the stock of Yeshe. Look back at the genealogy a little while and read some of the stories. You know, when Ruth was in Moab and her husband died, she had married an Israelite. And the Israelite had a heritage. And she went back to Israel with her mother-in-law, Naomi, and she met a fellow Israelite that of her brother, of her husband, who was entitled to the inheritance. And the way he had to get the inheritance was redeem his relative's inheritance. So he married Ruth and redeemed that inheritance. And then they had a son, and they named him Obed. And Obed begat Yeshe. And Yeshe is the one he's talking about here. And that son was number 8 on the totem pole in that family. He had 7 stalwart sons that was rejected. And David was anointed. And so Yahweh had a branch, and it was planted there in that episode, and then the root began to spring out of that. And he says, and his roots will bear fruit. There's more fruit than we can imagine in what David did. Then we go to verse 2. The Spirit of Yahweh will rest on him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, and Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of Yahweh. Now these attributes were promised to David, but David was human. But Yahshua fulfilled these attributes, and he is downline descended from David. Verse 3, his delight will be in the fear of Yahweh. Yahshua feared Yahweh with a love, a magnificent fear. He was not afraid of him like a cowering person over somebody that's trying to hurt him. He had the fear of complete obedient love. He loved his Father. He loved his Father so much till he put himself to where he didn't even have a will or desire to have anything that did not please his Father. In other words, he didn't sneak around and smoke. He did exactly what his Father wanted him to do. He will not judge by the sight of his eyes. And praise Yahweh for that, because if he saw some of us, he'd probably have to make a decision. Neither decide by the hearing of his ears. He's not going to hear the tattletales. He says, but with righteousness he will judge the poor and decide with equity for the humble of the earth. He is going to restore this population who are the humble of the earth, and he is going to do it with equity. He says he will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. Now this rod, many people think about like a hard stick or a long stick, and you know they used to use the rod in school back when I was in the 1st and 2nd grade. But what he's talking about here is the straight law, unbending law. The law is laid down. It's called Torah, the teachings of Yahweh. It's the rules that we are judged by, not condemned by. We are judged by. Judgment in the context is living with those rules. He says, and with the breath of his lips, he will kill the wicked. In other words, he'll take the wicked core right out of us. He will bring us to righteousness with his equity. Righteousness will be the belt of his waist. In other words, that's a metaphoric. Means that it will be the support of his whole operation. The faithfulness, the belt of his waist. The wolf will live with the lamb. See, he's not going to allow one species to overpower the other. He said, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat. There's going to be peace and harmony among all of his creatures. The calf, the young lion, the fatted calf together, and a little child will lead them. He is going to give the little children responsibility of leading. He said the cow and the bear will graze, their young ones will lie down, together the lion will eat straw like the ox. The nursing child will play near a cobra's hole. In other words, the cobra will have no occasion to harm the child. And the weaned child will put his hand on the viper's den. In other words, he can direct the cobra and make him do tricks like the circus act. He said, they will not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. There will be no sin, sickness, and disease, and no destruction in his holy mountain. And that means his kingdom, his government. He says, for the earth will be full of knowledge of Yahweh. Can you imagine that? If all of the people walking around today had enough of knowledge of Yahweh that they were in perfect harmony with each other, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? He says, as the waters cover the sea. That means it's complete. It does it all. Verse 10. It will happen in that day that the nations will seek the root of Yeshe, who stands as the banner of the peoples, and his resting place will be glorious. Now this is talking about Yeshua, the root of Yeshe. And he is the banner. That means he is our ensign. See, all of the tribes had an ensign. Judah had the lion. Reuben had the face of the man. Dan had the eagle. And Ephraim had the ox. Ox means prosperity too, because he's a beast that you can plow and plant and grow, and it was a determination of wealth in ancient times. But Yeshua is going to be our banner. And we sang that little song here about the banner, and it is nice to hear it and participate with it. But it's going to cover all of the peoples that he restores. And his resting place is going to be glorious. And here's the key verse. It will happen in that day, Yahweh will set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant that is left of his people from Ashur, from Mitzrayim, or Egypt, from Patros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, and from Kamet, and from the islands of the sea. Now this is almost descriptive of all of the bodies, land bodies, and all of the little bodies that's in the sea, scattered throughout the world. In other words, that's worldwide. He is going to have his righteousness operating. In verse 12, he will set up a banner for the nations. And that banner is going to be Yeshua. His name is going to be present in everybody's decisions. He said, and will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Yehudah. Two different groups. And both of them have the same destiny. For the four corners of the earth, or from the four corners of the earth. That means that Yehudah is scattered too. All over the world, you can find Jews in just about every major city. If there's any economy going on there, there'll be some there. And you'll find the Israelites in every city too, because they're scattered that far. And so predominantly, Yahweh has put them all over the earth in every man-made nation that they can give a name to. And he has this promise that the banner will be present and identify them. Yahweh Nisi, or Nisi, that means banner. Yeshua is that banner. In Jeremiah chapter 16 and verse 15 is the key verse, but we're going to start with 13. He's still writing history in advance. He is telling us what is happening. He said, therefore will I cast you forth out of this land unto the land that you have not known, neither you nor your fathers, and there shall you serve other gods day and night, for I will show you no favor. He has allowed the people to follow their religious courses. He threw them out of the land. That's the reason our ancestors has been migratory peoples. We have migrated from one land, one continent to the other, and we have freely worshiped other deities as a nation. We have the religious rule in this country to prove it. But there's coming a time when he's got to correct it. Verse 14, he said, "Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that it shall no more be said, as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Mitzrayim." In other words, this saying is not going to be needed to be said anymore. Verse 15, key verse. "But as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north," he is in the process of gathering us back, "and from the countries where he has driven them." We are the most driven people in the world, and our ancestry proves it. We have been driven. When our colonial fathers landed on the East Coast, it was not long before they was pushing through to the West. My specific grandfather in North Carolina colony, or the Carolina colony, went out with Daniel Boone into Tennessee. And then they migrated all the way out to the west. And then in the War of 1812, they migrated back to Georgia and colonized in Georgia. That's in just about every family that has a colonial ancestry has got some little itinerary where your people scattered around. Some went up north, some came south, some went south and then went up north, and we have mingled all over this country. But he says here, see, we have been driven by Yahweh. He says, "I will bring them again into their land that I gave to their fathers." See, Yahweh is going to bring about something that is mind-boggling. Our father Abraham inherited the land, and he's going to bring us back. Jeremiah 16 and 16. "Behold, I will send for many fishermen, says Yahweh, and they shall fish them up." Why did he call the disciples fishers of men? Because they were called to go get these people. Now, they thought it might be a weekend. They'd just go there and get them and bring them on back, but it didn't happen that way. And we are the extension of that, and we are still some being called for fishermen, and some being the fish. And Yahweh's working this thing out. "And afterward I will send many hunters." It's going to get to the point to where he's got to have some that's a little bit have a better ability to find them. A little more expertise is right. "And they shall hunt them from every mountain." Every government in the world that is considered a mountain in the eyes of Yahweh, and they're always lesser mountains than Yahweh's mountain, but he is going to hunt out his people. He is going to hunt out his people. "And from every hill out of the clefts of the rock." There's no place we can hide. He says, "For my eyes are on all their ways." See, we don't do anything in secret from Yahweh. His eyes is on us continually as a human race. He says, "They are not hidden from my face, neither is their iniquity concealed from my eyes." They cannot hide their evil thoughts, their evil ways, their evil doings. We can't hide anything from Yahweh. He says, "For I will recompense their iniquity and their sin double." See, they're not going to get out of it easy. It's not going to be just a free ride. They're going to be recompensed. But he says, "Because they have polluted my land with the carcasses of their detestable things." And that's false worship. And it's also false government. Because everybody worships the government. The government is a deity in that respect, because everybody expects the government to do something for them. and their academia. Everybody expects if they get an education, they're supposed to get more. But they don't learn righteousness in academia, so they don't get more. Oh, they do. They get more work, more paperwork. He says, and have filled my inheritance with their abomination. See, if we follow after the notion of man, it's going to be an abomination. But Yahweh is calling us back, and we are going to receive our inheritance. In Jeremiah 23, this is the promise. He is still working on His promise. He has not given up on it. He has not forgotten it. Now, we can forget it. You know, people can forget the day of the Sabbath and not go to church. People can forget appointments with doctors. People can forget a lot of stuff. But Yahweh don't forget. He says, I will gather the remnant of my flock out of the countries where I have driven them, and will bring them again to their folds. See, we're still His sheep, and He is real mindful of His sheep. He takes extraordinary care for His sheep. No wolves He allows to mess with them, and He can keep the diseases off of them, and He's going to gather us back to His fold. And they shall be fruitful and multiply. See, our lives is not going to be wasted. You know, you look at some people and they do some things and you think it's a waste, but one of these days you're always going to turn everything around, and we're going to be fruitful and multiply. He says, and I will set up shepherds over them. Yahweh's apostles will shepherd them. Who shall feed them, and they shall fear no more, nor be dismayed, neither shall any be lacking, says Yahweh. Can you think about it, if you're doing a job or you have to do something in society that you're not lacking in any expertise that you have to do? See, to get up and make a speech, if you are not lacking, it would be good to just know that you were qualified. See, we are still struggling. But Yahweh said that there's going to be a day when we will not be lacking. He says, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David a righteous branch. And He is going to make known this banner that He's just been speaking about. And this righteous branch is the one that we're going to be celebrating in this next few days as the Passover, because He became our Passover. And He says, and He shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. Yahweh is going to allow Him to come here and establish a government that Yahweh has created. He says, in His days Yahudah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely, and this is His name, that which He shall be called, Yahweh our righteousness. See, will He be our Elohim? Will Yahweh be your Elohim? That's your question. I would hope everyone would think that what He is doing for us is for your own benefit. Everybody is heir to it. He said, therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that they shall no more say, as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Mitzrayim. But as Yahweh lives, who brought up and who led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from the countries where I have driven them, they shall dwell in their own land. And see, that's our promise. We have a destiny that is above and beyond the imagination of anybody. And Yahweh is sitting as our sovereign. Yeshua is our banner. And we are going to be multiply and be fruitful in righteousness. And Zephaniah 3:16. In that day it will be said to Jerusalem, don't be afraid, Zion. Don't let your hands be slack. See, the stuff that's going over there in Israel right now, between them and the Arabs, that is horrible. But Yahweh's going to straighten that out. Will I be your Elohim? Those people should be asking, will he be our Elohim? Verse 17, Yahweh your Elohim is in the midst of you, a mighty one who will save. Yahweh marches constantly in the midst of his people all over the world. He will rejoice over you with joy. See, when we're holding these little feasts, Yahweh's having a little joy. I would hope that we are pleasing him. Anyway, it's a tool for us to learn his righteousness. He said, he will rest in his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. Think about that. Is Yahweh singing over us today? Praise Yahweh, it's a good thought. Maybe he is. Maybe this little group, what we're doing here, is causing him to rejoice. He said, those who are sad for the appointed feasts, I will remove from you. Now don't take this wrong and say he's going to remove the feast. He says those who are sad for the appointed feast, they're going to be taken out for a while. He says, I said, they are a burden and a reproach to you. That's the people who are sad about the feast. He said, behold, at that time I will deal with all those who afflict you. It's coming up a time that anybody that has been afflicted, those people are going to be dealt with. Those people who have run roughshod over people through governmental appointments and all kinds of stuff that we have going on in every country, the failures of our economic systems and all like that, Yahweh is going to deal with that because they have afflicted his people. He says, and I will save those who are lame. So if you got a position of being crippled, it's going to be done away with. And gather those who were driven away. I will give them praise and honor, whose shame has been in all the earth. At that time will I bring you in. At that time will I gather you. For I will give you honor and praises among all the peoples of the earth when I bring you back your captivity before your eyes, says Yahweh. Will I be your Elohim? Praise Yahweh.